Hey everyone, Brandon Lee here, back here in Phoenix, Arizona to shoot this podcast with you. I have a really amazing guest with us today. His name is Brendon. For those of you who live in Arizona, you certainly remember back in 2013 the devastating wildfires that tragically took the lives of 19 brave hotshot firefighters as they were trying to save people's lives and save their homes. There was one lone survivor out of that hotshot group, and that was Brendon. Brendon says that he had definitely struggled with addiction prior to that, and after that tragedy, spiraled downward even further into addiction. The good news is he's here to share his experience, strength, and hope. He is now sober, and he's no longer a firefighter, but he's out there helping people get sober up in Prescott, and he's saving lives. So I'm so glad to have you, Brendon, here on the podcast.
Brandon.
It's so awesome to have you here. And what I love about this is that you heard about my podcast through a group in recovery, and somebody's like, man, you got to get on this podcast and share your story. So I'm super grateful that you agreed to share your story. Brendon, take me back, before we get into the tragedy of the Yarnell fire, take me back a little bit about where you were raised and where you grew up and your first time either sipping alcohol or trying a drug.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I grew up in Southern California, and we kind of bounced around everywhere. You know, everyone was like, oh, were you a military family? I'm like, no, just a troubled one. And so we moved probably every 6 months to a year, lived in Los Angeles for, first 6-7 years of my life, so pretty young, and then moved to Oceanside Vista, San Diego County. And my first experience with marijuana and alcohol was about 13. And so I remember the first drink I had was Sailor Jerry. I was with my brother, and I remember sitting there thinking, this tastes horrible, but it is taking away everything I don't want to think about. And I knew at that moment, looking back, that was it. That was a moment where I was like, I have found the escape that I needed from the life that I didn't want to live. And so a few months following after that, I gotten high for the first time, and I was smoked it out of like a, I can't believe I'm about to admit this, like a tire stem for a bike, with like a screen filter on it. And one of those other things where I was like, this is filling the holes that I need to be filled in my life.
I got to ask you then, for me, I started dipping into cocaine at age 15. I grew up in Southern California, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, all those beach communities.
Yeah.
And so people ask me all the time, like, how have you, of all people, growing up in beautiful Orange County, become a drug addict? And, it wasn't actually until 5 years into recovery that I can truly answer that question, why I started so young. And for me, the trauma happened to me when I was about 7-8 years old and was repeatedly molested by my piano teacher and my youth soccer coach. And that, untreated, came out sideways by the time I was 15. So when I experienced that numb from cocaine, I wanted to chase that numb and chase that high. So my question to you is, did you suffer any early childhood trauma? Was it just a traumatic household growing up that you wanted to escape from?
I think it was just the bouncing around. I had a mom that loved me dearly, and I had grandparents that cared. My dad was gone by the time I was 2. And so I think just trying to survive, and I was trying to do the right thing and be a good kid, and it just wasn't working for me. And so I said, fuck it, I'm going to go this other way because this fills the holes that I have. And I, a lot of people like yourself have that young childhood trauma, and I don't believe that I had that, to that extent. I maybe had some trauma, but not like that. I think I was just really seeking something to be a part of.
Okay. So you ended up here in Arizona. At what time did you decide to become a firefighter?
When I wanted to become a firefighter is when I moved to Prescott, and I started seeing wildfires, and I started, thinking about a career. And, I just thought to myself, I'd love to do that. Like, I'd like to be out there. I'd like to give back to the community. I'd like to not be this person I am today, which was, some young punk kid that was smoking weed, selling weed, drinking, and just causing a ruckus.
So when you had the opportunity to join the Hotshots, and, for people who are listening to this podcast, maybe back east or all over the country, and they're not familiar with Arizona, we have a group of revered firefighters, and they're part of the Hotshot group. I mean, these guys are going out there in the desert, in the wildfires, where these fires are raging out of control, and they're so skilled, they're so trained. It's a remarkable group and an elite group. Were you an active addict while you were a firefighter as part of the Hotshots, or was that during a sober period of your life?
So 3 days before I got hired, I was smoking heroin. And so the day that I got hired is the day that I looked back on drugs. I never looked back. I said, you know what? This is an opportunity. So kind of backwards. My daughter was born March 2nd. It's April. I get this opportunity. And it was just an opportunity and a chance to turn around my life. You know, that second chance that we're all looking for.
Were you married at the time?
I wasn't married. I was
married.
19.
Okay, you were 19 years old. Did the mother of your children or your daughter at that time, know that you were a heroin addict?
She didn't know.
You
so
hid
nobody
it from
knew.
everybody.
Everyone thought it was just pot and weed, and there's a few friends that knew kind of what was going on, but I really tried to hide that because I was so ashamed and had so much guilt behind it that it wasn't until probably at least 6 months to a year after that I had got hired and gotten clean or sober that I even told anybody that I was using heroin, that I was using speed, cocaine, everything. Like no one had a clue. And it just, it was hard to hold on to it, but I just felt scared because I didn't get sober through counseling. I didn't get sober through the rooms. I got sober by literally trial by fire. Like I got a job, white knuckling it. And I didn't know what sobriety was. I just knew that if I wanted to be a dad, that shit couldn't be in my life.
Right. So you end up joining the Hotshots. And we'll just go right to it. 2013, you get the call that there's these wildfires that are happening up in Yarnell. Mm-hmm. And you go out there, and through all of that, 19 of your brothers died in that fire, and you were the lone survivor. Tell me, I'm not going to make you relive any of that, but tell me what it was like. Did you suffer survivor's guilt? Did you ever ask yourself, why didn't I die? And what was that guilt like if you did?
Oh, I mean, for 3 years almost. I'd say 2 to 3 years I asked myself that question, like, why? And it wasn't until I had gotten help that I'd figured out those answers I needed. And so nightmares, PTSD, the whole gauntlet, depression, multiple suicide attempts, guns to my head, just in a rage, trying to fight what was the thoughts that I had that I couldn't overcome, just the flooding of emotions, reliving those scenes that I had witnessed. There was no escape besides to drink. That was the only escape I had, and I was so strongly afraid and against going back to drugs because I knew I would end up dead like that.
And here's the thing. We all suffer tragedies in our life. They don't always have to be as devastating as the tragedy that you walk through by watching 19 of your brothers die in a fire. But I tell people this all the time. If we don't seek the right help, whether it be therapy or counseling, a lot of people like us, we turn to booze. We turn to drugs to cope and to manage and to numb. But I know for me, it just made the problems even that much worse.
Yeah. For me, it was just a spiral. I went from cleaning up my life for 2.5 years being in the fire service, doing pretty well, and single dad at the time, and taking care of my daughter and paying my child support, spending time, being a person in the community, being active outside of my work and things like that. And so when I had lost my brothers, it flipped the switch again. And it was like, here comes booze. It's at firefighter memorials. It's common. It's welcomed. And I was like, okay, like if this destructive behavior is, welcome, then I'm going to bring it.
Were there people in your life who said, Brendon, like your life is spiraling out of control. We need to get you help. Were there people in your life that saw this destructive behavior after Yarnell that tried to get you help? Or you didn't accept their help, or what was that time period like? Certainly there had to be a lot of people concerned about you.
Mm-hmm. There was what the media saw, and there was the lie that I was telling, and then there was a few people close to me that knew what was going on that had tried to hint at me getting help, and I just couldn't see it. I could not see any end to the pain that I had felt because I had went and seen a counselor initially, and we had like 3 or 4 sessions, and he tried giving me this poem, and I remember looking at the poem going, like, how is this gonna bring them back? Like, how is this going to help me grieve? Like, this has nothing to do with who I am culturally, spiritually, emotionally, where I'm at physically. Like, this doesn't even come close to like what I'm going through. Like, this is like, if this is what counseling is, I don't want none of this. Like, you can leave. Like, there's a door. No, thank you. I'm good. I'll figure this out with a bottle of booze. Like, that's worked so far. I'm still kind of around, let's see how that goes. So I did, that was the first 3 months. And after that, I was completely closed off to counseling.
So what was that then? I'll ask you this. What was your rock bottom? What was that turning point for Brendon to finally say, listen, here's my hand. I need help up. Like, what was that part of that rock bottom? And how many years after Yarnell did you ask for help and finally really to see the light saying that this is not the way I need to live. I need help?
Yeah. It was a little over a year after the tragedy. It was in the fall of 2014, and we went to Colorado Springs for one memorial, International Association of Firefighters. It was over 100 and something firefighters that were honored that year. 19 of them being my brothers, the largest, and it was just, name, department, and people that didn't even know them were just shook. They're grieving their loved ones, being shook by this tragedy, and it was just so, what's the word I'm looking for? It just took over my mind. And so after the services, what do? We're firemen. We go to the bar. And it was like before I could even hit the bar, I had 6 drinks in me. People knew who I was, and it was like, what? If it's being handed to me, I'm going to take it. And so I go home, I spend time with my daughter, and I'm just sitting there, and I can't even get out of bed. I'm not even hungover. I'm just so depressed, so far out of it, that I can't get out to even enjoy the time that's with her. And so I go to drop her off with her mom. We have split custody at the time. And she falls asleep, and we stop. And I'll never forget her face when she knew that she was going to go see her mom. Because it was just, she couldn't crawl out of her seat fast enough to get away from me. Because I was sucking the life out of her. And that's one of the toughest things to admit as a father, is that I was damaging my daughter, because I thought since I wasn't drinking around her and I wasn't hungover around her, that I was being a good dad. And when I saw that happen, it just hit me. And so I'm halfway to Phoenix, I'm about an hour away from home. So I turn around, I start headed home, and the thoughts are just flooding. I'm going back to the day it happened, the fire, the mortuary, the funerals, everything is just hitting me one after another. The last radio call, the transmissions, the interviews, all that stuff that I've been, going through is coming back. And so finally I just pull over the car, and I got a gun in my car. We live in Arizona, loaded, put it to my head, and I'm sitting there just like screaming, yelling, sobbing, wanting to pull this trigger, but I couldn't fucking do it. And instantly I see this image, and it's my daughter dancing in my living room. And there's just this moment where she was dancing, and she's got this balloon tied around her ankle, and it's loud, and I'm getting frustrated. And I remember just telling myself, just shut up and get up and dance with her. And so I remember getting up and dancing with her, and we just twirled in this little apartment, and this balloon noise disappeared, and all I could feel was just joy. And I held on in that moment, and I looked down, and I ended up dropping the gun, and I said, okay, I need help.
Wow.
And I go home. 2 weeks later, we're back in Maryland for another memorial, same size, same kind of stature, and we're going through that process again. And so we find ourselves at a bar again, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, hey, can I get 5 glasses of whiskey? And the lady, oh, who are they for? And I'm just like, yeah, they're for some friends, but they're really for me. And so she pours them, and I'm sitting there, and I'm going 1, 2, 3, and I get to about my 4th, and this lady comes up to me. Her name's Carrie, and she's kind of been around. She's a counselor, and she's been around the whole time through this tragedy, helping families, and she's always asked, hey, Brennan, how you doing? I remember she asked me, she goes, hey, Brennan, how are you? I remember just looking at her, and remembering that moment in my truck, wanting to get help. And I'm like, either I can give her the same answer I've given everybody, I'm okay. I'm fine. I'll get through this. I'm tough. I have their love. And I was like, no, it's enough. Like, enough's enough. So I pound another one. I'm like, I need the liquid courage. And I go, I'm fucked up. Put a gun to my head last week. And I do want to die, but I don't want to die. I just want to be a dad. And she goes, okay, are you willing to work? I kind of looked at her and I was like, work? Like, I'm a hotshot. Like, you know how much weight I carry? Like, I'll put in work, And I go, yeah, I'm willing to put in the work. Like, I'm at the end of my road. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to end up dead. Like, this is not going well for me. And so she goes, okay, I'll help you, And so she helped me find a counselor. And for the first few sessions, it was like I was just so far gone and out of touch with feelings and emotions that it was just trying to comprehend what it was like to be angry, what it was like to be sad,
And I have to ask you, now that you've been in recovery, do you look back at that moment? Do you look back at that? I mean, I see God moments. I refused to allow God into my life for so many years that I was using. I was the Antichrist, I was like, F you to God, right?
Yep.
And then once I started working the steps, I started to look at some of the miracles that were presenting themselves in those moments leading up to me finally asking for help. Do you look at that woman who was at the bar that day that saw you order all those whiskey shots, who asked you, Brendon, how are you? In a way that's not a general question that we typically ask the people passing by, like, hey, what's up? How are you today? But a genuine, how are you? Do you look at her as perhaps maybe a guardian angel?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's divine intervention. I don't believe in anything, that's coincidence. Everything is pure divine intervention. And that's where God put that lady in my life, where I needed her right then and there. Because she had asked, a few hundred times beforehand, how are you? And I wasn't ready, but I needed to hit that experience and that desire and that desperation that we talk about of like, okay, I'm willing to give my life to death. What does it look like if I give my life to God? And that's where I was at. It was like, either I'm going to die, I'm going to give it to God, and I'm going to live. And I haven't tried this one because I've been trying to kill myself over here. Bottle of pills, bottle of booze. It's not working. Okay, let's try this other thing and get help.
All right, let's talk about some of the hope now, because it's a really impressive story. So, at what point you thought about going back into firefighting, right? And there was something maybe that was just missing, and somehow you took a turn. And I tell people this all the time, like, news is my passion. Like, I love news. I love telling people stories and sharing people's stories to inspire and uplift other people. But my purpose in life is different from my passion. My purpose in life is to try and spread a message of hope despite addiction, to help those people who are suffering in silence. Doing a podcast that I don't make a single cent on, but I know the emotional impact it's having on so many people out there who are struggling. And so you ended up getting into the recovery world. And tell me a little bit about what you're doing up in Prescott now.
Yeah, so a little over a year ago, I had this dream, about 2 years ago, of opening up a center to give back what I have been given, because the opportunity wasn't affording itself to others. And so I opened Hold Fast Recovery. We've been open for a year this month. And it's just been a beautiful journey. And like you had said, for me, it was like, how do I turn my purpose into passion and a profession? That's like the route that I see, is purpose, passion, profession. It's in that order. If you don't have it, it's not going to be right. And it's not going to be what you love and what you enjoy, and it won't last long. And so I knew my purpose was to help others. And what I was passionate about at the time wasn't fighting fire anymore, because the men that I'd love to fight fire with weren't here. And it's not that I couldn't find other people to fight fire with, but it was like, I've lived that childhood dream out. I have this special time and place in my heart for that moment. It wasn't just firefighting. It was my sobriety. It was becoming a father. It was becoming a man. Like, I wanted to hold that and save that for the fire service, because I didn't want that to become tarnished by other things. And so it was time to move on. And so I found that passion in recovery and trauma, and working with those who have been in the situations that I've been. Like you had said earlier, someone might have not suffered a tragedy like mine, but a tragedy to someone else is completely different. And we can't sit here and go, well, your trauma is worse than mine, or trauma's trauma, pain is pain. It hurts, ow, ow. Like, we need to help people. And that's where I've come to a place of like, okay, I have my purpose. That's to give back. I have my passion. That's in recovery and trauma. So how do I turn this into, I got to put food on the table for my family. And I want to make sure that what I'm doing is giving back. And that's where Hold Fast Recovery came in.
There's a buddy of mine who I interviewed for this podcast. He was one of the lead guitarists for the rock band Korn. His name is Wes Gear. And Wes, was playing for Korn. Clearly, he was a meth addict. He did a ton of drugs and booze. He's a great guy. And what he told me is that he was in his nightly prayers. He said, God, listen, like, I want to help people. I want to help people, but my passion is music. Like, how can I combine the two yet still make a living, right? We all have to make a living. We all need to put food on the table, right? And so Wes was telling me this. He goes, Brandon, my nightly prayers started being, God, I love music. God, I love recovery. And I love helping people get sober. How can I combine all three for the rest of my life? And suddenly he had this epiphany, and he started an organization called Rock to Recovery. And so it's a musical program that many recovery programs across the country are now buying into, because they're starting to see that those people who've isolated, even in 12-step programs that are really hard to connect with and to open up, they have found that through writing music and performing music and through the arts is actually helping them open up to be more accepting of the 12 steps. And so I find it beautiful that you similarly were praying to God, saying, God, how do I make a living, but yet fill my purpose in life, which is to help other people? And it presented itself to you. And I also tell people, I'm like, listen, I think one of the reasons why addicts are able to help addicts more so than doctors able to help addicts is because there is this level of no bullshit.
Yeah.
In that you tell a doctor, when a doctor tells you, I know it's trouble. No, you don't know the pain. Do you? To the doctor, do you really know this pain? Do you really know what I'm struggling with? Unless you're an addict, you do not know.
Yeah.
Unless you've gone through it, you do not know. People have this idea like, oh, just stop, right?
Yeah.
It's because they've never been in that cycle of addiction. And that's why people like you are able to get through to people who come to your recovery centers, because you've been through the tragedy. You've been through addiction. You know what that desperation feels like. And it's like you get their attention because they're like, yeah, man, you have walked in my shoes.
Yeah, that's the difference between sympathy and empathy, right? And it's like you can sympathize for someone all day long, but when you can empathize with somebody and you know it, you can look at someone and you can say, I've seen the shoes that you've walked in. I don't want to walk in those, but I know where I am today. I want to help you get to something of that level for yourself, that happiness, that joy.
Is having this recovery center in a way healing you?
Oh, yeah. No doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that what I get to do and the lives that I get to see transformed is healing me every day. God gives me an opportunity to give back and to wake up and be a father. And it's a drive, it's a motivation, it's a piece of my life that I'm willing to make great sacrifices for. And so I truly believe that I get back as just as much as I'm giving, if not more. I know I am, because I continue to change and evolve and grow. And it's just been an amazing journey to be a part of Hold Fast Recovery.
It's interesting. When Brendon showed up here to record the podcast today, I went down to go grab him, and he was already on the phone, with somebody who was, I'm assuming, it sounded like they needed help. Like you were talking to somebody that may be feeling like they were hitting their rock bottom. So he was like taking phone calls of people already reaching out to him, asking for help. When you take those calls, what goes through your mind, and how does it help you, and by helping others?
I think the first thing that goes through my mind is just like, how can I help them? Because a lot of times we're not going to be a good fit. We might not have available beds. We might, they might need something specific, different than what we treat. And so going into it initially, it's like, God, just give me the wisdom to be able to help them get to where they need to be, whether it's here or somewhere else. And then it's just listening and comforting and just talking and having a conversation with them. So often we think it has to be this professional thing, and you got to hit all these marks, and it's like people are calling because they're broken and they just want to be heard.
Yeah.
Like, just listen.
So you're up in so there's a lot of recovery up in Prescott. It's kind of like is an area of Arizona where there's a lot of recovery up there. What do you say to the people? I get flooded with emails and calls every time a podcast airs, and it's usually like my husband or my wife is battling addiction, or my son or my daughter is battling addiction. what do we do? Like it almost is, they feel so helpless and hopeless. They don't even know where to begin to go. And as somebody now in the recovery world, what's that advice? What's that piece of advice that you give to that mother or father who has a child who is suffering from addiction that really doesn't know what to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of resources that we can give out. And, I think Al-Anon, Nar-Anon are great resources, reaching out to your local church and helping them find a good therapist that can guide them through this process, a recovery coach, and just kind of walking them through. For me, it's big on, here's the process. These aren't the places. Like, those are for you to decide. And here's some quality ones that I know of, but this is a decision you and your loved one need to come up with. But this is usually the way it works. You go to hospital or detox, you go to residential, then you go to PHP, IOP, outpatient, and you need to find a fellowship. You need to find a group of men and women that are like-minded, that have the same goals, and that's to be sober and to enjoy life to the fullest. Like, back in the day, there used to be like, no, it wasn't cool to be sober. Like, thank God for our era where we're trying to make this cool. Like, this is a cool thing to do, not to use.
Okay, first off, it is this cool. As I was waiting for you to arrive today, I just read an article, which I will be posting, that there are now sober bars popping up.
Yeah.
And that is the first time I'd ever read. And the owner was like, no, we want to create a fun environment for people who are just over drinking. They want to, like, maybe even detox for, somebody who's, I've been binging a lot lately and I just want to, but it gives them that social environment to, like, meet people and still go out and be social and be fun. And I was like, we're coming into an era of opening up a sober bar. Like, I would have never thought that. And then I saw in GQ magazine, they did a whole article that sober is the new sexy. And I love it. Here's the downside, and I'm going to talk about, I just want your little quick insight on this. Here's a downside and the warning that I have for people out there who are looking for help, is that we have these social media influencers now who, I'm scrolling on Instagram and I'm seeing like somebody with 2 years and all of a sudden they're advertising as a sober coach or a sober companion. And my fear is that people are going to be taking advantage of the situation of this movement, that sobriety is a really cool thing. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing. And we're going to end the stigma by more of us coming out and saying, hey, listen, we've struggled too. We're on the other side of it. My fear is that somebody out there is going to be taken advantage of, and you got to do your homework on some of these people.
No doubt. I mean, it's happening today. And so it's, legislatives trying to put in laws and regulations, and they have, with body brokering and things of that sort.
Which I did an investigative piece on patient brokering, and I was just stunned at the fact that Arizona is still one of those states that just wanted to make it unregulated.
Yeah. Finally, we've got the law passed.
Which is great.
Now they've cracked down, and within the sober living houses and the quality of care, and insurance companies are really putting a squeeze on these centers to really hold a different standard. And so as you see some of these people wither away, you can tell why they're in this business, Yep. And that's why, a lot of people that I've come to run across that have been in unethical practices, they say, you've gotten into it at the worst time. I'm like, this is the best time to be in here because everything's being cleaned up.
Right.
The ethics are here, the integrity's here, and all that's left is to treat people and just fight for their lives. Like, that's it. That's what I'm here for. I'm not a therapist. That's why we hire them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a business entrepreneur. I'm someone who is willing to make sacrifices for other people, and I can see where that needs to be made. And that's by lending an ear. Yeah. Lending a hand, putting in the work that they're willing to put in, and just carrying on that integrity from the fire service that was instilled in me into this community, so people like us can work together to say, hey, there's help out there. We don't know exactly what the right fit is for you, but we can find it.
It's a phone number, it's a phone conversation, and all you really have to do is pick up the phone. Here's what we're going to do, because I know many of you are going to be wanting to ask me, like, how do I find Brendon? Where's his recovery campus? And, what do his services provide? What I'm going to do on my website, escapingrockbottom.com, look over on the tab with the treatment and resources page. We're going to be putting up Brendon's Recovery Center, all of his contact information, so that if you do, you can live out of state and he'll still take your phone call. But a lot of the folks I get phone calls from are here in Arizona. So I want to be able to present to you at least someone you can contact who is local here for you or your family. Pick up the phone and you can give Brendon and his recovery campus a shot. You can see the trauma that he suffered through and look what he's making his life at today. As we close this podcast, one final question. What is your relationship like today with your daughter?
It's phenomenal. I have my daughter 50% of the time. She is in my life. I'm married. My wife, she has a daughter, which I just love and adore, and we have a son that's due in 4 weeks. So
congratulations.
Thank you so much. Our family's growing, and it's just an opportunity to give more love and just to spread that kindness and kind of be a beacon of hope to people. Like, you can do this. Like, you can come out of rock bottom. Like, the possibilities are endless, because as addicts, once we dedicate to something, we're unstoppable. Like,
it's so true. I tell people all the time, I'm like, addicts at our worst definitely should be feared. Addicts at our best should be definitely welcomed.
Yeah.
And I love it, man. Congratulations.
Thanks,
you're an awesome guy. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of what you're doing for the community too. It's much needed in Arizona, and I'm glad you're still around. So
thanks.
Thanks for joining us on this edition of Escaping Rock Bottom. We'll see you back here next week.